Hello, everybody. Hello. All right, so welcome to week 5 of Living Free. So we have 2 incredible guests with us this afternoon, which I'll introduce in a few moments. But first, I just wanted to give a few announcements, and then we'll bring up Shigematsu Sensei, who will lead us in meditation, and then we'll move into today's activities. And again, I just want to remind us, if something that resonates with you today, we'll bring in the snaps coming from a poetry background. So if something resonates with you, we just want to snap it out just so that we all can exchange energy and be on the same page, and it's going to be great. Cool. So a few announcements. So we have, of course, the upcoming events for Living Free. So if you're taking this class for 3 or 4 units, you're required to also attend 2 Living Free events. There are a couple coming up that I want to announce. So RISE, Radical Indigenous Survivance and Empowerment, will be at a new date, so take this new date down, which will be 5/18, which will be on Thursday of next week at 5 p.m. at the Harmony House. Also on that same day, we will have a community healing workshop with Ratchet Dharma Collective, who will be joining us in a couple of weeks. They'll be leading a community guided meditation for 1 hour from 10 to 11. And then from 12 to 2, there'll be 3 different embodied healing community workshops. So we hope that you'll join us for that, and they'll be at the Harmony House as well. And then finally, we have Jamila Woods, which we're really excited about. And she will be with us at the Bing Concert Studio. And it'll be on June 2nd, beginning at 10 o'clock, Bing Concert Studio, which is below the Bing Concert Hall. And you just heard some of Jamila Woods as you walked in today. Cool. So those are quick and easy. So next I'm going to bring up Dr. Stephen Murphy Shigematsu, who will lead us through our morning, or not our morning rituals, but lead us through our class rituals, which will begin with a 15-minute meditation. And then I'll come back up and introduce our guests for this afternoon. So we'll just do a deep breath in and out with some noise. All right, nice. One more time, deep breath in. And out with some noise. All right, one more time. Deep breath in. All right. So there are a few seats, if you want to join us in the front, there are a few seats scattered around. So I have the honor of introducing LaBeija. Kia is a contemporary artist who provokes awareness, acceptance, and activism for HIV/AIDS through her portraiture and performance art. Her work explores the intersections of community, politics, fine art, and activism. As a visual artist, she stages digital portraits as theatrical and cinematic reimaginings of non-fictional events to spark conversation, complicating the ways we view her subjects and the spaces they occupy. Her portraiture utilizes the medium of storytelling to preserve histories and make socio-political commentaries on current events. She is a featured artist in ArtsAid's America, which was a recent exhibition alongside artists Keith Haring, Annie Leibovitz, Nan Golden, and Robert Mapplethorpe, where she was the only representation of a female artist of color living and born with HIV. LaBeija is also a member of the iconic House of LaBeija and uses voguing as performance practice and community-based work. It is my pleasure to welcome, and please give her a warm welcome for LaBeija. Hello. Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, can you hear me? Good afternoon. How are you guys feeling? How are you feeling? Good. Okay. So before we get started, I'm going to read something for you all. And this is something I wrote very, very recently, just based on how I feel at this very moment in my life. And I thought I would share it with you guys. I once thought that I belonged to this city, that I had an obligation to its giants. But what I've learned is that loneliness may cause you to fall in love with...
But what I've learned is that loneliness may cause you to fall in love with objects over people. Metal and steel that seem unbreakable. Then the towers fell. My mother soon after that, and with her crumbled my belief in invincibility. I believe I was drafted, that my number was picked out of some funny-looking hat, and I immediately had a title and a story. My mind, a Chinese fortune teller, always one step ahead, always shifting in colors and numbers and words of encouragement I can't even give to myself. And though I live in a country that for many years was designed to hate me, I am better at tying my own noose. These are words that are not written on paper, but prose that I write in my sleep when I should be far off dreaming. Now, some of these stories get lost. I found mine through old articles and photographs of my mother talking about AIDS and miracles. And though she was drafted too, she found herself fighting a battle that she was destined to lose. But along with her smile, I inherited the thickness of her skin, the blood running through my veins, her only living will. So I paint her into pictures so that I may sleep at night, so she may continue to breathe through 16 by 24 frames of color, constructed by buildings intruding on skies that never asked for more than air. My father used to sit on the terrace at night and talk to her. She was the moon, and she could only be accompanied by 1 or 2 stars, but it was enough to keep him content. Most days, I can't keep my back straight. I hear her telling me to keep my head up, but the curve now runs so deep, the display of confidence causes pain and suffering. So I sink back into the earth. And it's quiet now, my body moving to the sounds of sirens, glorified by those who call themselves icons, who have reached immortality through lines and shapes and boxes, bodies moving in sync to the church bells that ring only after midnight. Designated street corners filled with black and brown, glistening from the heat of summer and the iridescent lights that lit up runaway slaves. Delicate, the weeping petals of yellow roses during a rainstorm.
And so now I'll introduce Alex Fialho, who will be moderating a conversation with Kia. Alex Fialho graduated from Stanford with a BA in art history in 2011, where he worked most closely with professors Jody Maxim, who is in the room today. Jody? Yeah! Pamela Lee and Peggy Phelan, and wrote an honors thesis on the work of Glenn Ligon. He moved to New York City a week after graduating and now works as the program's director for visual aids, where he facilitates projects and conversations around both the history and immediacy of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, utilizing art to maintain HIV/AIDS visibility, consider its legacy, and galvanize contemporary response. Fialho's extensive oral histories with artists including Nan Golden, Ron Athey, and Lyle Ashton Harris will be part of the Smithsonian Archives of American Art's forthcoming Visual Arts and the AIDS Epidemic Oral History Project. He also curates exhibitions for Lower Manhattan Arts Council and is a frequent contributor to Artforum. Please welcome Alex Fialho.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? It's great to be back on campus.
Yes.
Hi, Kia.
Hi, can you hear me?
As a-lan noted, I'm the programs director for an organization called Visual AIDS. We provoke dialogue around HIV/AIDS awareness by supporting artists living with HIV and preserving the legacies of those lost to AIDS, because AIDS is not over. We've worked on many artist projects with Kia, many of which we'll talk about today, so I'm very excited to be here with you. And I'm also particularly excited to be back on campus. Just 6 years ago, I was in your seats in this lecture hall, so it's exciting to be here and in this context with one of my favorite artists that I've worked with in my time in New York. So let's dive right in. Thank you for your really moving reading just now.
It was hard.
Why is that?
I don't know, it just felt really hard to read it out loud in front of a bunch of people. I wrote it recently for a new project that's going to come out soon, but I've never read it in front of so many people, so I was shaking up there. I was a little nervous. Did you guys feel me being nervous? No? I was okay? How did you guys feel? Did I feel good?
I heard some snaps, which is good.
I heard some snaps too. I heard some snaps too. But it felt good. It felt good to read it out
I think
loud.
this is an appropriate photo to start on, Kia and Mommy, one of your earlier portraits that I know at least. Can you just tell me a little bit about what inspired this photograph?
Yeah, so this is my bedroom, my childhood bedroom. I've lived in this room when I took this photo for 24 years. And I had started this project of thinking about photographing my bedroom, thinking about space and thinking about things that happen within space, thinking about all the stories that inhabit a space, and thinking about all of my stories that have inhabited this particular space, you know, being a baby, being a child, being a kid, being a teenager, being a young adult, being an adult. That's a lot of things that happen. That's a lot of stories. So I made one photograph that was very interesting to me. And then after looking at it, I thought about working on like some kind of series. And working on a series that not was only about my bedroom, but working on a series that was about kind of everyday things that I've experienced living with HIV and being born with HIV and growing up with HIV. This particular photo I decided to take because I had this moment of thinking about my mother. My mother passed away from AIDS complications when I was 14. She was my best friend, and I just miss her so much. And that's my favorite picture of her. And she is smiling in that photo. And every time I think about it, I think about that moment. I think that picture was taken in 1995 at my aunt's wedding, and I must have been sitting somewhere next to her, and I imagine myself sitting across from her and laughing with her and smiling. And I was having this moment of thinking of, wow, I'm doing such interesting work in terms of photography and art. I wish she was here so I could take a portrait of us. I wish I could do a self-portrait of my mother and I together. And I was kind of really devastated and upset about it. But then I rethought about it, and I said, I can still take that picture. So I used my favorite picture of my mom, and I used this very glamorous outfit that I'm in, because it's a part of, you know, my aesthetic, my character, my being in the world as LaBeija. It has been a very glamorous process in the making, and I see myself as being kind of like a star, old Hollywood glamour. You know, that's something that I've always had a love for. So I decided to use my character and put my character in that situation with this picture with my mom. And I think about the floor, and I think about lying on the floor, and I think about all the years that I spent crying and lying on this floor, and I think about when my mom was making her transition, how I took that picture amongst other pictures, and I put them in a circle, and I lit candles, and I prayed. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And so when I see this picture, that's what I think about. Those are the memories that come up for me. And this is just currently what my bedroom looked like when I was 24 years old. I'm 27 now, but this was 24.
Thank you. I think every time you share those stories, I appreciate you being so honest and vulnerable in front of so many people.
I know, I felt a little tear coming on.
I saw it.
Yeah.
But
It's okay. If I need to, I'll let it out.
Why did you settle on photography? How did you come to photography as a practice to think about as an artist?
I remember always loving photography, always loving photographs, always loving images. And I remember my first camera was like a little Nikon, like regular like power shot camera back in the MySpace days. And I remember I started taking pictures with it, and I started feeling myself. And that was very exciting to me, was taking pictures. And I also remember the first time I got like a video camera. And my brother has been videotaping me my entire life because he's a big film guy. But this was my camera. And I remember maybe about the same year that my mom passed away, she said, now that you have this video camera, I want you to record me. I want to tell you everything about my life, everything that I've seen, everything I experienced, so that you know, so that you never not know. But we never did it. And she passed away before I could do that. So I started thinking about ways in which, you know, capturing things were important, and capturing things in particular moments, because you don't know when those moments are going to pass, you know. So if you feel something in that moment, it's really good to hold on to it if that's something that, you want to carry with you, that you want to cherish. But my brother bought me like a really nice camera in 2010, and I was doing a show touring, and I decided to take pictures of everybody who was on the tour. I just kind of fell in love with it. And I started to work with it more. I started taking pictures of everybody I knew, lots of dancers, lots of artists, and I was so intrigued by who they were, their stories. And then there came a point where I turned the camera on myself. And I was taking a photography class at Parsons with the amazing George Pitts, who just passed away. And he really inspired me to, really go forth with my work, because he looked at it and he said, your work can be published. It's very, very good. And so then I just started playing with different things. And I was also told in school that, I was taking pictures of aesthetically really beautiful, pretty things. And my teacher was like, you need to push a little bit harder. Your photographs are they're very well done. They're very pretty, but there's something deeper. And that's when I started to work on these photos and talk about something that had been quite a secret for a long time, and that's really why I've become the artist that I am, because I took that leap to be vulnerable and to, sit in spaces like this and talk about things that are very private. Like this.
Exactly. Perfect segue. Morning sickness, which I remember is the first photograph of yours that I saw, and I was just really stunned and struck by it. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's going on in the photo?
Yeah. So this is my bathroom in my apartment. And my bathroom is, has had many, many stories that have lived in my bathroom. I know you're thinking, how many stories can live in a bathroom? A lot. But the particular stories I'm thinking about in this photograph are two things. One is I'm thinking about the many years that I spent waking up in the morning before school and lying on the bathroom floor because I was feeling sick from the medications that I have to take every day, and that I will have to take every day until they find a cure. And how I used to hide that, I wasn't talking about it in school. It wasn't something that I wanted people to know about. And sometimes I would come late to school, or I wouldn't come at all. And people would say like, oh, Kia, you are always skipping class. And I'd be like, yeah, girl, like I just pretended that I was just like, a bad kid. And I was like, yeah, I just don't come in the morning because I don't feel like it. I live 10 minutes away from my high school, but I just didn't wake up in time. But really it was because I just couldn't get up, because these medications, in my circumstance, because the medications affect all people differently. But for me, it hit me very hard. And because I've lived with it for so long, I've changed medications quite a lot. And, all that comes with dizziness, tiredness, extreme nausea, vomiting. So all of that is what goes on in that bathroom. But then also thinking about mourning and the loss of somebody, and thinking about how many hours I spent locking myself in this bathroom, just crying and crying and crying when I lost my mom. So those are the two things that are happening in this image. And once again, I pose it in a way that, is not supposed to feel upsetting. It's supposed to feel like something very real, but if you saw it in a Disney movie, in terms of color, in terms of liveliness, in terms of, glamour, glamour as in, casting a spell, magic. And just color, I think color is really important. And so many times when I think about the word AIDS or HIV, or when I see that imagery, it can be just very devastating and very sad, which is very real. But for me, my experience has been different because, I'm a Pisces, so I'm a dreamer, and I'm always in my head. So this is how I would see it, if I was outside of my body, and reimagine this moment of my life.
How do you think through the idea of processing loss through your photos and through being creative?
The way I think about processing loss is that I believe that, relationships, they don't end when someone passes away. They just shift and they just change. And so creating these photographs was like this way of actively participating in a relationship with my mother, you know, thinking about her very consciously in creating this work, you know, and being able to sit and talk about her in a way that her spirit is still here. It's with us right now because I'm speaking her name, you know, I'm telling all of you about her, and I'm sure you'll feel her spirit through me. So in that way, it's been really important for me to make these images because they've not only been like super fun to make, but they're, you know, very healing. And they're something that I've done, you know, just by myself just in my alone time, which, you know, has always been really important to me. But yeah.
And then I think on the flip side, how about glamour? And how does that relate to what you're trying to embody in your self-portraiture in particular?
Well, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be an actress, and I always wanted to be on Broadway. And I went to a performing arts school, and I studied musical theater for half the time, and then I switched to dance because it was way cooler. No shade. But I think about these images as being incredibly performative. You know, I think about, you know, what would this moment of my life look like if it was on a Broadway stage? You know, and so in terms of lighting, you know, I think about spotlight. Spotlight is very important in a lot of my work, you know. It's thinking about being the star of your own life, you know, and taking control of your own narrative, and also being able to rewrite your story as well. Because sometimes when I have these actual real moments, I think about this picture, and that's where I am now, you know, instead of thinking about everything that has come before this. Now I can just be this.
Go on to In My Room. This series of 3 photographs and more that we'll talk about were taken in your home that you've lived in for now 27 years. Can you just situate us a little bit about that space in New York City? Where is it? What has it meant to you to grow up there and live your whole life calling that home?
Yes. Well, I grew up in the very center of Manhattan, right next to Times Square. So when I think about where I grew up, I think that, you know, I grew up in the center of the universe, because I think of New York as the center of the universe, you know? I love California. I do. But I think of New York as being this very central place where so many different people and bodies, you know, exist. I grew up right on 43rd Street and 9th Avenue, and I grew up in a building that is just filled with artists. These 2 towers went up. They're called Manhattan Plaza, and they went up in the 70s in a time where my neighborhood, which is called Hell's Kitchen, was not a safe neighborhood. It was filled with pimps and sex workers and drugs and just like a lot of things that were just, you know, pretty seedy at the time. So nobody wanted to move into these huge towers. So the people who owned the buildings decided to make it artist housing. They were like, let's make it for the artists. Broadway is right down the street. We can make it affordable. We can make partially for the artists, partially for the elderly. I think there's partially for people living with disability, you know, and create this amazing community, which is where I grew up, and which is like really, really incredible. Like Alicia Keys grew up in my building. Terrence Howard grew up in my building. So many beautiful, inspiring. Angela Bassett? No. I'm sure she came through. But Samuel L. Jackson was a security guard in my building. Yes. That's pretty cool. But yeah, so this is my apartment. It's a 2-bedroom apartment on the 24th floor. I have a huge balcony, which is what you saw on the first image. That's my balcony. And I can see all of Manhattan. Like, I can see everything. And growing up, I used to be able to see the ball at Times Square when it dropped every New Year's. I saw the Empire State Building, and I saw the Twin Towers. And I saw the towers when they fell from my balcony. So this space is funny because when I showed my brother this picture, he said, wow, your closet looks just like it looked when you were a child. Which I always think is really, really funny, because I think about, you know, how we think that we change so much, but we don't change that much. You know, we're always going to be connected to who we are on the inside. And for me, a lot of that has been about play and dress up. I always loved to dress up. And growing up around a lot of artists, they're always dropping off things at my house, like clothes that they didn't want or extra costume stuff from shows. And I always felt like, you know, I could just put these things on and become this other person, you know. And I for hours just be in my room, in my mirror, playing out these different scenarios and these different costumes. So as I grew up and got older and, became a part of this new world of, to me, this like new world of beautiful artistic people and ballroom and all this kind of stuff, I found this space where like dress up and costume was just like so perfect. It just fit so perfectly. So, this is the first image that I took, and it wasn't intentional. The other images are all very intentional, but this one wasn't. And this is what really started my idea to continue the series. And a lot of people say different things about this picture, and I think I just let people filter in like their own thoughts. But when I really think about the picture at its core, I think about loneliness. And I think about, being someone born with HIV and feeling like I was the only one for so long. Probably until I put this picture out, I felt like I was the only one with this experience. Until I was able to, start hearing from people slowly but surely, do different social networks and emails saying like, wow, I saw your picture and I have that same experience. And being like, wow, like that's the power of imagery, and that's the power of also not just imagery, but sharing who you are and sharing your story.
When I see this picture, I think about the amazing performance you did a couple of years ago in front of it at Abrams Art Center. I don't know if you want to describe that a little bit, or I can describe it as
Describe about the context about the show.
So this is a program. Kia was invited to be involved in an event for an exhibition at a space in New York City, and she was involved on a presentation and panel. But it was 4 white men and Kia as another performer. And that was sort of the overall context. But Kia showed this image and then performed and sort of made a really important intervention in the space. I think I'll let you speak to that more.
I was invited to participate in this show, and I was feeling like I couldn't do it. I felt like I couldn't do it. Because, to be honest, it's really hard to talk about HIV all the time. It's not easy, because it's really not that glamorous. I make it look glamorous, my photographs. But in reality, it's not that glamorous. And so I was feeling a certain type of way, and I'm like, I don't even think I'm going to show up. Like, I don't even think I can go. Like, this feels weird. This just feels really strange to me. But I decided, I was like, talked to myself in my head, talked through it, and I was like, you just need to show up. Just show up. So I showed up in the same bra and underwear that I was wearing in the picture. And my performance was basically, I sat on a chair, and I showed the image, and I just took off all my clothes until I was in the image, sitting on the chair just by myself. And it was kind of a moment of talking about loneliness and being the only woman of color living with HIV in this space, which I feel like I often usually am, because, in terms of the AIDS narrative, women are never talked about. People of color are not talked about enough, even though they're like trying to push it now. But it's like, we see them. We can see ourselves like on buses and in train stations for PrEP ads. But like, when we have something like Our AIDS America, which we'll talk about later, it's like we're nowhere to be found because we're not important to the institution. We can only be in certain particular spaces which they feel like we can be put in. So that was a feeling that I had and that I kept having because I kept showing up to these places and being like, I don't see anybody that looks like me here, and that is a problem. And so that was kind of my way of just letting that out, was just sometimes you just gotta get naked.
In front of a picture of
you front of a picture of you naked. I mean, I'm not naked, I'm wearing my bra and underwear. But.
Yeah. And I'll just say it was one of the most moving performances I've seen. It just, everyone else gave great performances, but it just held space in such a way that...
I turned it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the 24 series, the first 3 photographs. What did it feel like for you to produce those, but then also to start to exhibit them?
Weird.
Let's jump forward to in my gallery.
Oh, yeah. It felt good and strange. The first image in my room, I think I posted on the Visual AIDS Registry first. And I was taking a class at the New School with a professor who at the time was curating the Visual AIDS show for that season. And he had seen it on the registry, and he was like really intrigued by it. And people love to tell you about your work. So he started telling me all these things. He's like, it means this, and it's so this, and it's all this, and this, and this. And I was like, yes, it's all those things. And I was like, and I have, 2 other images that I have created, and it's a series if you, are interested in it. So I showed him the other 2, and he was really like, excited about it. And I showed them in the visual aids show, and I was so scared. I didn't even invite anybody. I didn't invite anyone. I think I invited people like the day of. Maybe the day of or the day before. I was like, hey, I have some work in this show. If you want to come, if you're busy, it's okay. You don't have to come. But if you're not doing anything, you can come to this opening. And they looked so beautiful in the gallery. And it was just like a really special moment for me. And that was the first moment that we met. Yeah. And so I took this picture, which I lovingly call In My Gallery. Because this is the gallery that the show is in, and I was doing a program called Tea Time, which is a program that was started by Jessica Lynn Whitbread, and it's this amazing program where she is an incredible activist, an incredible artist, and whatever city she visits, she looks for women living with HIV to have these tea parties. And the only requirements for the tea party is that you're living with HIV, you bring a teacup, and you bring an anonymous letter to another woman living with HIV. And the first time that I participated in Tea Time was the first time that I met another woman living with HIV since my mom had passed. So that was like 10 years, basically, that I had felt like in this place alone. And it was awkward. It was uncomfortable for me to engage in this program because I was like, this is so weird. I never am around other women that have similar feelings and understandings like I do, and I don't even know how to communicate with any of them, It's like when I had been around, around people that were in similar situations living with HIV, it had always been like queer men or, white men or, men, men. So it felt very, very strange. But I had the opportunity to facilitate one of her Tea Time events in the gallery, and it was really, really amazing. And after all the ladies left, I just felt so good. I felt so like nostalgic, and I had my camera, so I was like, I'm gonna take a portrait right now so I can remember this moment. And so I took this picture in my gallery.
And I'll just say about seeing those first 3 self-portraits in that show, I wasn't working for visual aids at that time, but I was writing for Art Forum, and there was this really moving exhibition called Ephemera as Evidence, about the history and legacy of an academic named Jose Esteban Munoz. So I was thinking through his writing in exhibition form. And Jose passed away pretty unexpectedly, and the show happened about 6 months afterwards, so it also sort of felt like a tribute exhibition in that way. And to see your work for the first time there, I was really struck by it. I wrote a review about it for Art Forum and insisted that they put the morning sickness image as the accompanying image. And it was particularly great because the day that review came out, a review of Kara Walker's exhibition with the Sphinx came out. So it was Kara Walker's Sugar Sphinx and then Kia's morning sickness photograph. And
I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So it's exciting to be here years later.
I know.
Continuing the conversation.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about visual aids and the support through that in the context of exhibitions or project like Love Positive Women? Or
Yeah, my mom was an activist before she passed, and so when I was younger I was around a lot of activist work, and it was something that I felt very passionately about, but I kept feeling like I was reaching out to different organizations and none of them were really like connecting with me, and then I was working in a gallery at Parsons and I was like Googling stuff and I came across Visual Aid's website and I was like, oh wow, like this website is really interesting, like this organization looks really interesting, and I kind of forgot about it. But then a friend of mine who I was working with on a project called Grenades, which we'll talk about later, was like, oh, I work with Ted Kerr at Visual Aids, and he was wondering if maybe you would be a part of this panel discussion. And I was like, sure. So I was part of this panel discussion. It was my first time kind of talking on a panel, and I was 23, and I was in a sea of white men, and I stood up and I said, hi, my name's Kia and I've been living with HIV for 23 years, and everybody just was gagging. They were like, what? They were like, no. They were like, how could you be living with HIV for 23 years? Like, it didn't make any kind of sense. And that was the moment where I was like, I need to do this more often, because if people don't understand that, if people are surprised by that, then there needs to be more conversation being had about that. So that's when I began this relationship with visual aids, and I started participating in a lot of their panel discussions so I could be that representation that I wasn't seeing. One of the most intense ones that I remember was a panel that we did at the New York Public Library. And I think, what was it called? Morning?
I
forgot what it was.
With Sarah and...
Yeah, I forgot what it was called. But it was really intense because it was about children that grew up with parents who died of AIDS. And these were children that weren't necessarily living with HIV. I was the only one on the panel living with HIV. But it was something that was never talked about, is all the children that grew up with parents that died of AIDS, you know? And how that's a story that's also very never even thought about. You know, you never think about all the kids that lost their parents, you know? And it was really intense, and once again, I didn't really want to invite anybody because I was very scared. But at the last minute, like the day before, I wrote a big post on Facebook, and I was like, please come. And everybody I knew that was important to me came. And they sat there, and they were my witness as I told my truth for the first time about, you know, being born with HIV, living with HIV, and, you know, losing my mother. Because, you know, people would ask me about how I lost my mother, and, you know, I'd tell them, oh, like, she died of pneumonia, or, you know, she, you know, passed away at some point in my life, or et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's, you know, not something that you necessarily want to be having in-depth conversations about, because then you got to spill all your tea, and you don't necessarily always want to do that. But since then, I've worked on a lot of different programs with visual aids. We did a talk at the Brooklyn Museum, which was all women, which was unbelievable.
Here Then, it was called Here Then, Here Now, Women Art AIDS Activism, and it was in the Brooklyn Museum Theater, and it was our largest event to date, at least at the time that I've been there. I think it was like 286 people in the audience.
Yeah.
It was really, really amazing.
It was beautiful. And it was really amazing to, you know, sit next to a lot of other women that have been fighting for a long time, you know. I felt honored.
How about, let's turn a little bit to your activist work and grenades in particular. Let's talk about how did you form grenades, and maybe this image specifically.
So I went to school with a friend of mine named Cassidy Garner, and she was a part of this group called Queerocracy in New York, and she was working on a lot of different projects. And funnily enough, we had this idea to recreate Grand Fury's Kissing Doesn't Kill, which the beautiful Julie right here was one of the beautiful models in Legend. But yeah, we had this idea to kind of recreate this Kissing Doesn't Kill because it had been something that was so prominent and important to us. But we were like, how can we make it, you know, of this day? How can we make it of this age? How can we make it even more inclusive of like all different types of people, you know? Because the ad is very inclusive, but we're like, who else can we invite? We really want, you know, people to see that, you know, HIV can affect everybody. Everybody. It's not racist or homophobic or transphobic or classist or sexist or any of those things. It can be me, it can be you, it can be someone in the audience, you know? So we kind of started to form this little collective, and then I think I did my talk at New York City Public Library, and I met someone who was like, I'm really interested in this work, how can I help? And I said, I'm doing this thing, I don't really know what I'm doing, but you can help, and let's just meet up. So we started having these little meetings, and then another friend kind of jumped in, and we're like, okay, we need some kind of name. We're like thinking up all these names, and then like my two friends are like, let's be grenades, like a bomb, like we're blowing stuff up. And I was like, okay. Has AIDS in it and the grenades, and like, okay, that sounds cool. So we rolled with it. And so we started making some, you know, kind of small flyer stuff. And this is one I think that I made in particularly, which kind of goes off of the silence equals death, but starting to think about the more current issue, which is silence equals prison. Because, you know, there's so many states that have laws that, you know, state that if you engage, you know, with sex with a partner and you do not tell them that you're living with HIV, whether you infect them or not, you can go to prison. And after you serve time in prison, you get out, you have to go on the sex offenders list. And so it ruins your entire life. And this is even if there's no transmission. So it's really intense. And I thought about the triangle, and I thought about, you know, silence equals death. And I thought about, I'm like, it's too quiet. It just feels too quiet. We need to talk about it more. So I made a black triangle, and I just wrote silence equals prison on it.
HIV criminalization is an issue that we talk a lot about at Visual AIDS. I'll just sort of contextualize. There's 36 states in the US that have prosecuted HIV positive people for consensual sex, spitting or biting as examples of, quote, criminally exposing others to HIV. An example that people are talking about a lot right now is a college student named Michael Johnson, who was a college wrestler in Missouri, is sentenced to over 30 years in prison for having sex with two men and quote-unquote criminally exposing them to HIV. And there's not enough conversation around it. So thank you for the work that you do.
Criminally exposing them to HIV. Sounds nuts. Yeah.
How about this Forever 21 intervention that you guys made with grenades?
Oh, yes. So
Awareness.
So we made a series of 3 posters. The first one is a to-do list, which is make art, cure AIDS, eat breakfast. And it was something to kind of like think about, you know, a very regular to-do list and something very, very extraordinary in the middle of it, you know, and think about how important it is to just put that on your everyday list, you know. That's on my everyday list, you know, cure AIDS or talk about AIDS or, you know, do something important. So that was the first one. Then we have It's Too Quiet on here, silence equals prison. And then we have AIDS isn't racist, you are. Because, you know, when you really think about it, you know, AIDS is not a racist virus. It's really, you know, when you think about it's the human being that puts that on the person. So we made these 3 posters, and we had this like fun idea where we were like, okay, let's make the images, let's like make the words, and then let's go to Forever 21. Let's go get little girl t-shirts, like these like really cute like children-sized shirts. And we printed the pieces out on acetate, and we glued them to the shirts. And we made sure that the Forever 21 tag was hanging out. And we even had this really good idea of like really infiltrating Forever 21 and just taking over the whole kids section and putting all these things on there, because people would really go like, oh my God, like why would you talk about AIDS in a children's section? It like makes people think, and you think about like, oh, like children living with HIV, like, you know, children that have parents living with HIV, like children who have parents that died of AIDS. Like these are things that you don't think about, and you wouldn't think about them at some place as mainstream as Forever 21. Unfortunately, I lost the shirts, which was very, very sad. I picked them up from the gallery, and then I went out for drinks. I left them there, and when I came back, they were gone. So these do not exist anymore. But at least, you know, the flyers still exist, and we can always get more shirts.
So let's bounce off this idea of AIDS isn't racist, you are, to, I think, one of my favorite photographs by you. Your white walls can kiss my black ass.
Let's get into it. Get into it.
This was made in response to an exhibition that you mentioned called Art AIDS America, which was a really landmark exhibition around considerations of HIV, AIDS, and art practice. It was a traveling show, basically the largest and first museum traveling exhibition around the topic of AIDS, shown in Los Angeles, Tacoma Art Museum, the Bronx Museum in New York City, and in the South Museum outside of Atlanta. And of the over 100 artists included in the show, less than 5% were black. And if you look at contemporary statistics around HIV, over 50% of those seroconverting or becoming HIV positive are black men who have sex with men. So the stats don't line up with the lived reality. The stats of the show were very, very far from the lived reality of HIV in 2016 when the show was happening. And in Tacoma, where the show opened, there was a die-in by a really courageous collective called the Tacoma Action Collective, who did a die-in around the idea of hashtag stop erasing black people, and did a die-in in the middle of the gallery, and basically completely took the narrative of the show, which was, look at our first AIDS museum exhibition, it's going to travel all over the country, and said, this is not the type of context, conversation that we need to be having right now. And you were one of the artists included in the show, the only woman of color living with HIV, as was read in the exhibition, and had a lot to say about the controversy, most notably, I would say, in this photograph. Can you just talk about what you were thinking about it, and then this photograph as your response?
Yeah. It was really difficult being a part of this exhibition because there was a lack of communication between myself and the curator. A very big lack of communication. Like, so much that like I would hear things from visual aids before I would hear things from them and be like, how can you make those kind of decisions without speaking to me, you know? So it was really hard kind of speaking to them. And, you know, I had gotten a phone call, or I got an email about being a part of some really big show dealing with AIDS because I had seen, you know, this new body of work that I literally just put out, and was very excited about it. And I got on the phone and I spoke to the curator, and he was like, oh yeah, like we love this work, but we would love for you to make something new, and you know, you're gonna get this X amount of money and this, that, and the other. And I was like, whoa. I was like, okay. I was like, the money looks good. I would love to create something new for you guys. Let's do this. I was like all in for it. I was very excited. And I like immediately had this idea of what I wanted to make, and I was like really excited about it. He's like, I'll send you a contract like next week. I was like, great, yes, great. So I'm like waiting for this contract to come in. Like a month goes by and I don't hear anything. So I send an email and I'm like, hey, like, is the show still happening? I have this idea. I would love to talk to you about it. Nothing. Months go by. I don't hear anything. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'm not in the show. So I guess, you know, that dream is just going to disappear now. Then like months down the line, I get an email that's like, hey, you know, we just want to catch up about the show and send you this stuff and the stuff and the stuff. And I was like, okay, great. And then I hear that, you know, they don't want to commission me for new work. They actually want to show my series, which is fine. But I didn't hear it from them. I heard it from just going to the visual aids office and asking them, like, hey, what's happening with Art AIDS America? Oh, yeah, they're going to show your 24 series. I was like, when did they make that decision? They told me something completely different. But I was like, okay, that's still great. I would love to, you know, show this body of work. Then the curator hits me up. He's like, I want to do a studio visit. And I was like, awesome. He comes in, you know, he's very, you know, like put together, very like artsy type, very like, you know, like just particular, like a very particular person. And he like came into my house, which felt a little like invasion of my space. And he looked at my work and then started telling me all these things about my work. And I was like, yeah, kind of, but it really means this. And I was like, it just felt, it was like a weird connection. And then like when he was leaving my house, my dad was home and he told my dad, he was like, I'm gonna make your daughter a star. And I was like, really? I was like, that to me in the context of living with HIV just feels weird. Like it just felt really off to me. And I was like, okay. So then he left and, you know, the work was put up in the show and I get an email like the day after the show opens and it's like, oh my God, have you heard what happened with Art AIDS America? And I'm like, oh my God, what happened with Art AIDS America? And, you know, the word started coming out that, you know, out of 107 artists, there were only 4 Black identified artists. And out of 5 Black identified artists. Still not better, but 5. And out of those 5, I was only female Black identified artist living with HIV and also born with HIV in the show. And I was like, really? It just blew my mind, but at the same time didn't, because I was like, this is our institution. Like this is, you know, this is what it is. And, you know, they had told me that the show was going to be really inclusive about, you know, there would be many different artists that like maybe, you know, didn't have such a name, or maybe they, you know, passed away before they became, you know, the kind of famous artists that they could have been and all this stuff. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. And then they went totally left. And they were like, we're showing Keith Haring, we're showing Annie Leibovitz, we're showing, you know, Robert Mapplethorpe, we're showing like the iconic works, which are great, which I love. But they, you know, they left out so much of the story, and there were so many pieces that were not in existence in this show. And then when, you know, confronted about it, they said, well, there's not really a lot. There wasn't really anything, you know, that we could find. And I was like, I think you didn't really look deep enough, because there are lots of things. There were so many artists, you know. In the time that the show has been progressing, each state that the show went to has kind of added artists. They've added artists that they think are important, that fit, you know, artists of color, Black identified artists. And one of the artists that they showed in the last installation of Art AIDS America was Gerard Gaskin. And Gerard Gaskin is an amazing photographer who has been photographing the house and ballroom scene for over 30 years. And a lot of his subjects were beautiful, beautiful trans women living with HIV. To me, I'm like, I don't understand why Gerard wouldn't have been one of the first people on your list in terms of when you think of, people of color and HIV and this art institution, because he's an incredible photographer. And I'm like, why did he have to be at the very end? Why we have to throw him in last, Or there were so many other beautiful works that were added in the end that I'm like, it blows my mind that they weren't originally put in the show. But basically, I made this work because, the curators were trying to get in touch with me because I wrote a post on Facebook that was like, I stand with the Tacoma Arts Collective, I support you guys, like, this is ridiculous. And so he wanted to get on the phone, apologize to me. We set up a phone call, which he did not call me. And I was like, dude, like, this is the whole, everything that I've been dealing with the entire time you've been curating the show, is that you don't communicate with me, you don't show up, you don't send the email. I'm like, I should be the one doing that. I'm the artist. I'm the one who should be like, not sending the emails because I'm busy, not you. You should be like hassling me to like, get those emails in, not the other way around. But, he
done
sent,
that a little bit.
Yeah, this guy knows what that's like. I try my best, Alex. I try my best.
We text now,
We text. We're on that level. We text. But, the curator sent me an email. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I missed our phone call. The time difference, I just didn't. I'm like, how did you not know the time difference? You knew 30 minutes before our call you knew 30 minutes before. You had a conversation with my manager 30 minutes before, and you didn't call me, and I waited for an hour, and you didn't call me. I'm like, okay. So he sent this email about the phone call and all the reasons why my new work that I wanted to create wasn't in the show. You were too busy, and you were too busy. And you were too busy, and you told me that you were too busy, so the piece wasn't in the show. And I was like, what? It was just like all these things that he was saying to me, and I was like, we haven't even had enough email exchanges for you to even think that I was busy, And I went back and I found the receipts, and I was like, what I told you was that if you're coming to New York, I'm doing these events. If you want to come, please come. And I'll see you at my house for our studio visit. That's what I said. I never said I was too busy. And I clearly sent an email that was like, I have a new work that I want to create. Let's create it. And I ended up creating it. And it was in the show at the very, very end, which was really amazing, which I'll show you later. But I made this post with a very, very lovely long thing that I wrote that I could not find today, that I was trying to find because I wanted to read it. And I called it Your White Walls Can Kiss My Black Ass. Because the thing is that he was trying to apologize to me, and I was telling him that an apology, like that's nice. I'm grateful for it. But I can't accept it. Because how long am I gonna accept an apology? And my analogy was, if a slave owner keeps beating his slave, or if, a husband keeps beating his wife and he keeps saying he's sorry, you're just gonna keep taking that? No, I'm not gonna do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've spent so many times feeling like I'm the only person in the room to represent for such a large group of people, and that is not fair. And I shouldn't have to hold that all on my shoulders, It's a lot of weight to carry, And the reason why I still do what I do, the reason why I do these discussions is because, I feel like somebody has to do it, and hopefully someone else will be inspired and be like, I can do that too. I can talk about this too, But it was really intense. He never responded to my email, like I thought. I even saw him at the show, and he ducked because he saw me looking fabulous, and he just couldn't take it. And he literally we kept missing each other. I'm like, you cannot not see me in this dress I'm wearing right now. My hair was like, and I had sunglasses on. I was like, there's no way you don't see me walking back and forth. But, and I was ready to just have a conversation, be like, let's talk it out. Never happened. But
this happened.
But this happened.
And I'll just point to, it's sort of in the context of this conversation, I'll point to two of the readings, and I'll read one of the quotes from the reading by Ted Kerr about pieces around race, 1969, the year. Ted writes, quote, "The erasure of black and brown bodies impacted by HIV now is part of an ongoing historical erasure. While it speaks poignantly about the moment we are currently in, it also sheds light on the stories we tell ourselves when it comes to HIV/AIDS in the United States. What would it mean to the current AIDS movement if the story of AIDS in the United States had included black and brown bodies from the start? How would it change our collective ethics related to the virus? How would that change the work we did to reduce the harm of the virus now and in the future? answering these questions matter. By excavating the past to tell the long story of HIV/AIDS and its impact on Black and Brown lives, we're providing better life chances for Black and Brown people into the future, end quote. And another one of the readings is a 15-minute poem by the incredible Pamela Sneed, and it's called Funeral Diva. And one thing that Visual AIDS was really invested in this conversation around inclusion and diversity is the curators were saying there aren't artists of color in the art canon, and that's sort of what the exhibition is about, the way that AIDS affected the art history canon. And Gerard Gaskin is somebody who does photographs of the ball community. Pamela is speaking in this piece about the writing, the really rich Black and Brown writing community. So you have to sort of think outside of a traditional art gallery because there's systemic racism across the board in those spaces, and think about writing, filmmaking, dance as ways to incorporate creativity into this larger conversation of race and HIV. Mm-hmm. So those are just point you back to some of the readings in particular. Let's talk about undetectable and what does it mean for you to be undetectable?
Yeah. Does anybody in this room know what undetectable means in the HIV context?
No.
When your viral load is low enough that basically transmission is damn near impossible.
Bingo, you get an A. Please give this man a name. Yes, but...
Can you repeat it? So,
can I repeat it?
I'll repeat it.
You said it so perfectly. How am I going to
I don't know if everyone could hear it.
Okay.
I can shout.
Let's
Shout.
hear it. Yeah.
Shout.
Being undetectable while living with HIV means that your viral load is controlled and low enough that transmission is damn near impossible.
Ooh. Bingo. Very good. Undetectable. It's something that we don't talk about. So I made it a hashtag. So hopefully we can talk about it. So this project for AIDS Action Now is they create these incredible posters for this project called Poster Virus, and they make these large posters and they just put them up all over Canada. Toronto? Canada. In general.
Montreal,
Vancouver, those places. But you know, they asked me to be a part of Poster Virus, and I was trying to think of what I was gonna make, and you know, I started playing around with this image, and I started thinking about Marilyn Monroe, and I started thinking about, you know, icons. I like to think about icons and the idea of being iconic in my work. So I decided to kind of replicate myself in a, you know, kind of Andy Warhol-esque kind of vibe, and make a new hashtag that was called Undetectable, and Undetectable fades, because, you know, you're undetectable, you know, can't really be seen. Because being undetectable is something that we don't talk about, and it's something that was important to me because I started to think about, you know, if all the sexual partners that I had encountered knew what undetectable was, you know, in those moments where we had those encounters, things wouldn't be so scary for them, and things wouldn't be so difficult and hard for me. Because, you know, it's, you know, having that moment of conversation of being like, you know, meeting somebody that you want to engage in sexual activity with, and being like, wait a minute, I'm living with HIV. That is a really hard thing to do because you want to feel sexy. Saying I'm living with HIV does not feel sexy, ruins the mood. It's not something that feels comfortable, and you don't always know how people are going to react, because some people will really react very bad. And I've had situations where, you know, that has turned into things that were very, very damaging to me, you know, to my spirit, to my soul, to my body, to my mind. And so I started thinking about, you know, like, I want to talk more about undetectable, you know, and I want to also, you know, talk more to people, educate people more, because, you know, the more knowledge that you have, the more you can understand what this virus is. It's not what it was. It's not what it was when it first came out, you know, it's not what it was in the 80s, you know. People are living full lives, you know, people are living full lives, and when you're undetectable, it's like close to zero risk of transmission, you know. So it's just another level of safety, you know, and you should always keep yourself safe, you know. Some people living with HIV who are undetectable don't practice safe sex, you know, and that's because there is, you know, a very conscious conversation between partners and being like, I'm undetectable, is this something that, you know, we can participate in together without a condom? And that's their choice, you know, but it's about communication. It's really about communication. And yeah, so that's what undetectable is about. Go tell your friends.
So we've talked a lot about your artwork. But let's switch up the energy a little bit. And Kia is the overall mother of the Royal House of LaBeija.
Say it again!
Kia is the overall mother of the Royal House of LaBeija.
Mother.
So we're gonna watch a video that Kia vogues down in, and then she's gonna give us a little Vogue workshop for a minute or two. So
Yes!
let's sit over here and watch.
Okay,
from the
let's
audience.
watch. So think about that. If you ever want to use Vogue in your practice, voguing is about telling your story. And it's about celebrating who you are through a series of poses. The basics. That's the basics. Now, there are lots of elements and components that come into play, but you always have to remember these key things. You know, I am radiant, I am beautiful, my softness is strength, I'm a bad bitch. Don't ever forget those things. That's why I'm mother, baby.
What does it mean for you to be the mother of the Royal House of LaBeija?
I tell everybody what to do. No, I'm kidding. No. So the House of LaBeija is the first house in ballroom history. And yes. And this year makes 50 years that the house has been in existence.
How long?
50 years.
0.
50 years. Our timeline starts from 1967, which is when the documentary The Queen was being filmed, and when Crystal LaBeija, which is the first overall mother of the House of LaBeija and the founder, walked off a stage of a beauty pageant that she was competing in because she knew she didn't win because she was a woman of color. And she wasn't going to take it, and she went off and she did her own thing, and here we are today. Yeah, so voguing plays a very big part of ballroom scene and a part of the house subculture in New York City. And as a mother of the house in this 50-year, my place is basically to be of guidance. My place is to be someone to listen, and my place is to be someone who can take on a leadership role and lead us into the next 50 years. So.
Great. So we're going to bounce forward a little bit and talk about 5 more photos, and kind of in the context of the class, but also I think of these photos as definitely an extension of those earlier 24 works and the sort of themes that you're playing with there. So let's talk a little bit about In Search of the Sweet Life, LaBeija on Sugar Hill, which was made as a commission for the Studio Museum in Harlem. Mm-hmm. What was your family's history with Harlem, and how did you try to translate that into a photograph?
I was really excited when the Studio Museum invited me to do Harlem postcards, because they commission you to do one work in which they show at the museum that has to do with Harlem, and then they create postcards. So it gave me a chance to really think about my own history with Harlem, and to think about my family, and to think about, on my father's side, this idea of my family coming from the South and coming to New York to search for this opportunity. And so I went to go see my great aunt, who I used to always visit in Harlem. Now she lives in Jersey, she's a little older, and I went to go see her. And she told me all this history. She told me about how my other great aunt, her sister, had a restaurant in Harlem called Pauline's Dining Room, in which they used to feed Langston Hughes all the time because he was a starving artist. They told me about Sugar Hill. She told me about, all of her neighbors, Duke Ellington and, W.E.B. Du Bois, all of these incredible, incredible artists during the Harlem Renaissance. And I was just so interested by it. So I used my, what I like to do with photography, which is I'm very interested in space and in history and in stories and in storytelling. And that suitcase that I have is actually my great aunt's suitcase. So I thought about the idea of traveling to Harlem. And they call this neighborhood in Harlem Sugar Hill because it was where you could find the sweet life. It was a very affluent neighborhood for African Americans of the time. So it was an amazing project to work on, and just to talk to her and just to hear all her stories. And it's funny too, because my great aunt likes to call me Sugar. Sugar? She says it just like that. Sugar. So I thought that shooting this on Sugar Hill would be very appropriate for that. And the interesting thing about this photo, I think my favorite part about this photo, is the sign that says for sale. Because Sugar Hill is Harlem is completely different. It's completely gentrified. It's not what it used to be. There's a Whole Foods and an American Apparel. Well, not anymore, because American Apparel closed. But yeah, it's a completely different neighborhood. And so I thought it would be important to talk a little bit about, my relationship to it, my history to it, and thinking about, all the people in my family that came from the South to New York and what that meant to them.
This sort of relates to me to grandmother Willow and the
on the other side.
Exactly. So how about your grandmother and the context of Central Park and your family history in that space in New York as well?
Yeah. Okay, so on the other side. So on the one side, my Sugar Hill side, My dad's from Bed-Stuy, by way of, you know, everybody from Virginia and South Carolina. And my mom's from the Philippines. And her father is from the United States, and he is Native American and Caucasian. I scammed you all. Anyways, so when the movie Pocahontas came out in 1996, I went to see it in theaters with my mom. We cried through the whole thing, and it was like this thing because my mom was just, you know, starting to dig into her roots and, you know, look into what her native side was like, because that was something she never experienced because her father passed away when she was very young. And we used to always go to Central Park because we used to live close to Central Park. And we found this beautiful willow tree that was right by the lake, and it just felt like our spot. So it became our place that we would go. I guess we've probably been going since 95, 96, something like that, very early 90s. And it was our special, special place. And when my grandmother passed away in 96, we put her ashes there. And so we started calling the tree Grandmother Willow Tree. And we thought about, like, this is like the living, breathing piece of my grandmother. And so many magical things would happen. There's this thing in, you know, in myself, my mom, and my mother's mom is yellow roses. You know how, like, there's that one thing that always pops up, right? So yellow roses is that one thing that pops up. And I remember one day, maybe it was the first anniversary of her passing, we went to this tree and we were sitting, and 2 yellow roses just started floating by on the water. And we were like, that is so wild and totally expected, because, you know, that's usually how it works. You know, it's just like unexpected things happen, and they're so beautiful and magical, and you can't explain them, but they totally make sense. So when my mom passed away, I put her ashes here too. And the crazy thing about that with the yellow roses is, you know, I wasn't there at the hospital when my mom died. My dad got the phone call, and he reached over to me and he said, "Mom's gone." And I said, "Okay." And so we went to the hospital, and she was covered with yellow roses, yellow rose petals. I was like, who did this? I still to this day do not know who did it. I don't know who brought the roses. I don't know who put the petals there, but it was like this amazing, like, phenomenon that I still think. And I guess that we had a bundle of them, and the petals fell all the way from the hospital to my house, because I lived right across the street from the hospital. So I decided to take this picture, and I'm wearing my grandmother's dress. Some things in my photography that are important to me in terms of my self-portraiture is, you know, wearing things that either belong to someone that was important to me, or always wearing something that is, you know, vintage or secondhand, and, you know, not really spending a lot of money. So this is one of my favorite dresses that I used to wear at my grandmother's. It's actually yellow too. You can't see it in the picture. But it's this beautiful yellow dress, and it's like just perfect, fits me just so perfectly. And I took this picture in kind of this memory of, like, this grandmother willow tree as a part of my series, as a part of this special place where my mother rests and her mother before her rests. And, you know, it's like this tree that I can literally hug and feel their spirits. I went to Europe this summer, and when I came back, I went to the park with my partner and with her friends, and I was like, oh, like, we're by my tree. I don't really take too many people around the tree unless I feel a certain level of comfortability, because I'm like, you know, you're meeting my mom. We got to have a, you know, connection. But we were just having this great day. I was like, you got to come see the tree. So we come, and we're walking, and there's 2 trees. We're walking, and I look over, and the tree was gone. They cut it down. And I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked. I, like, fell to the ground. I started crying. It started raining out of nowhere, but totally not out of nowhere, because it's just like the universe works like that. And I was just crying and sitting there and crying. And I originally, this photo is in color, and I never felt like it made sense to me. And then after the tree was gone, it faded to gray. So I kept it gray. But I was so blessed to have this picture, and that I did this. And like I said, it's important. If you have these things that you want to do in the moment, do them. Because if you don't, you don't know, you know? Like that time that my mom said, please get me on tape so I can tell you all about my life, so that you know everything, just in case. And when I'm gone, you know everything. And I never did that. So, yeah, so this is a very, very important picture to me.
It seems from the conversation about this photograph and the one prior, that connecting to your roots and ancestry is really important, especially as you think about healing. I'm curious to hear more about that, but then also whether it's gentrification and the for sale sign or them cutting down this street, how you're thinking about connecting when forces, especially in New York City, capitalism, these types of forces are really changing the spaces that you feel connected to.
Yeah, New York feels very strange to me right now. It feels very strange, and I think race is a really interesting thing that goes on in my head because I've had so many battles with thinking about race. Because my father's Black, my mom's Filipino, Native American, but a lot of people when I was younger thought my mom was just white, and so they would be like, "You're white and Black," and then I'd be like, "I don't think I'm white and Black," and there was so many different things, and my going to high school and a performing arts school with a lot of white kids, I was their Black friend, But then there would be moments where it's like, well, you're not really Black. You're not Black enough, So it's like, well, where do you fit? That's not fair. That's not fair. So I've been doing a lot of research and I've been doing a lot of digging. And, I know that my father's side of the family on his mother's side is from Virginia. And I know that on his father's side, I just found out, I thought they were from Florida this whole time, but they moved to Florida from South Carolina. And so that's like this new thing that I'm finding, And what comes before that, who knows? Who knows where their original start point is? I did Ancestry.com. That was exciting. I found some spots in West Africa. And I'm like, well, that makes sense because that's where they dragged you from to bring you to the South. And then on my mom's side, everyone from my mom's side is basically from the Philippines or still lives in the Philippines. And I never really felt connected to that either because I felt like I was the Black kid in the Filipino family, So it's like, where do you fit? How do you identify? Is it that important? How important is it to you? People would ask me what my race was. I just started making stuff up. I'd be like, I'm Brazilian, Italian, Puerto Rican, Portuguese. And they'd be like, I knew it. But it's something that I'm still working through and learning and understanding that I can embrace every part of me. I can embrace every part of me, and whether or not people, from an outside perspective can understand that or see that or view me from however they're going to view me, it doesn't matter to me, because I am Black, I am Filipino, I am Native American, I am like a whole bunch of other things, and that's just fine with me. And sometimes it's even like, I think of like, no, I'm not even gonna say it, because I believe in myself.
Nice. Yeah. With your permission, we have a few more minutes, and I also want to have some questions and answers from the audience, so think about any questions you might have for Kia. I might direct them to your writing about this picture, which was in the syllabus. A few great pages that Kia wrote for a catalog called Lost and Found about Mimi's Last Dance. To sort of give us a minute or two to focus on the last two images. The first 10 years, which has an incredibly powerful story behind the making, and again, we're back to the room that we started in. We back, y'all. So first 10 years is a portrait that I did that was this was actually something that was just happening. This was the 10-year anniversary of my mom's passing, and I had a bunch of her stuff in a drawer that I just couldn't look at for 10 years, and it just sat there, and I had a moment where I was like, I need to deal with this now. I can't let all her stuff just sit in the closet anymore. I can't do that. So I just threw it on the floor, and I was just like looking through stuff. I put on my mom's wedding dress, I just fell to the floor, and I was like, I want to keep this moment of thinking about releasing and thinking about that moment of, especially in terms of grief when you're ready to deal, because, grief is a process. And when you're ready to make those steps to do things like, look through boxes, if it takes you 10 years, it takes you 10 years, So that's kind of the importance and significance of this picture. And some of the things are like my mom's address book, her shoes, her glasses, like little notes that she had written, a box with like her old IDs, some keys, just like very like, everyday things, but that were just so, just so tailored to her that I just couldn't look at them. My mom used to always wear a bell on her keys, so I could always hear her coming. She would always ring, and this bell is just sitting in there, and I just couldn't look at it for so long.
But I looked at all the stuff, and all the stuff that I didn't need, I let it go. And all the stuff that I wanted to keep, I consolidated it and I put it in a nice place. And I'm like, these are the things that I'm holding on to. But, you know, my mom is here, so I don't need to hold on to, you know, all of her old IDs and her address book with phone numbers that, like, probably don't exist anymore. Like, I think I can let those things go. But yeah, that was this moment. And the thing that I really like about this picture is a lot of my work is, it feels like everything that I'm doing in the picture is happening at that same time, you know? And it feels like this dance and this balance between really being in the moment and experiencing something and then capturing it but reimagining it at the same time. So there's a lot of things that are going on, but this one's very important to me.
How are you by yourself when you're taking these, and what sort of mindset are you in? Because obviously you're working through some very intense histories, especially with a photograph like this. What kind of headspace are you in when you start it, and then how do you feel after you've made the photograph? If I can ask, because that's a vulnerable question.
Yeah, I'm usually in a very, very emotional place when I decide to take a picture. And usually it's something has happened, or there's been something that makes me feel like, okay, I need to make something, because making things makes me feel good, you know? Having that creative moment is something that really feeds me, you know, and makes me feel just so good. So I'll have that moment, or it could be something like, you know, I felt really bad about something, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna create this portrait of myself so I can see myself as beautiful, so I can remind myself that I am beautiful. I am beautiful. The poses. But this one came out of just pure emotion and pure, just like really being in the headspace and capturing it. And I do almost all my portraits alone if I can. And I don't use a remote. I just use a self-timer, because there's something that's so interesting between this dance between the camera and getting in the photo, you know? Because you have 10 seconds, you know? You hear that, doo, and then you're like, and that's voguing. That's all it is. But yeah, so, you know, it's this dance between myself and the camera, and it's like going back and forth, seeing the image, tweaking it just a little bit till you just get that right one, then you're like, okay, I'm done. And it could be 10 pictures, it could be one, you know, it could be one, be like, that's it. Okay, I can just go back to mourning now, you know. I've captured this, you know, and I can continue mourning. And I can, you know, release this, and I can talk about it. And in that way, having people witness it is helping me heal, you know. That's the importance of a lot of this work, is being able to talk about it. And in that way, it's so healing for me.
One thing I love about your photography and the sort of self-portraiture, and that, you know, the earlier works are only from 2014, so it's not too much time lapse.
The early works.
Yeah, right. But it's, we're going to watch you grow if you continue to make self-portraiture work.
I will.
So we're going to watch you grow, and I'm excited to see you mature in the photographs as well as in your practice.
Yeah.
So the last one we'll talk about is the piece that you referenced earlier in reference to Art AIDS America. It's 11. Can you just tell us a little bit about the histories in this photograph, because equally incredible story.
Yeah, so this was the original piece that I wanted to make when Art AIDS America said, we want to commission you to do a work. I said, I know what I'm going to do. I immediately saw it in my head. So this is my doctor's office. And when my mother was first diagnosed with HIV, we had a really hard time finding good care, like really quality care, because this is New York, and like the healthcare system in New York is just shit. Or back then it was definitely shit. And so she found this doctor, and the doctor said, you know, that he would see us. But he would only see us if I would come in with my parents. Like, he doesn't see children. And when I talked to him about, you know, taking this picture, he was like, you know, I remember that day so well, because it was that thing that felt like that defining moment in my career. You know, I saw two parents coming in with this little child and thinking that, like, this is it, we're gonna die. Like, this, like, what do we do? You know? And so this is still my current doctor. So this is over 20 years. This is the same office. I don't know if this is the same thing that I'm sitting on. Hopefully he's changed it up a bit. But I asked him, I was like, okay, I really want to take this picture. I would really like for you to actually take my blood in the photograph. I'd like to, this is something that's very intimate. This is something that I don't, you don't see or share with other people, this moment of like, okay, take my blood so I can see what my numbers are, so I can see how I'm doing. Like, it's always this constant, it feels like taking a test, when you're taking like a really hard test, you're like, oh my God, I hope I got an A on it. That's how it feels every time. It's like, oh my God, I hope my T cells are above 400. I hope they're not, in the low numbers or whatever. And in the photograph, I'm wearing my prom dress. And I decided to wear my prom dress because it reminds me that there was a time that I didn't think that I would go to my senior prom. And it's also red. I love the color red. And I remember buying this prom dress. Everyone was going to Betsy Johnson to get their prom dresses for $500. And I was like, girl, $500 for a dress? You're going to wear what? So I went to this vintage shop, and I found this dress, and it was like $70, which was still expensive. But I was like, I called my dad. I was like, Dad, I found the dress. You got to get it for me. And this is my prom dress. And my doctor. And this is the first time I photographed someone else with me in my pictures. And when I asked him about it, he was like, yeah, just come in. We'll just have a regular doctor's appointment. And you can take pictures too. So basically that was just what it was. You just take my blood in the photograph. And, I think about it as, I call it 11 because my mother's birthday is March 11th. Mine is March 18th, both Pisces. My grandmother's birthday is March 14th. Lots of Pisces. But this was the 11th birthday I think I had spent without her. So that's why I titled it 11. And I thought about how, here I am as an adult sitting in a place that she used to sit, that she's no longer here. And so I just wanted to, it was something that I wanted to share. Because it feels like just like this, such a like, not secretive, but just such a quiet thing in my life. And I felt like, I just felt like I wanted to share it with people.
Thank you. So, yeah. So we have a couple minutes to open up to questions. I'm just going to sort of say a concluding thought, and that's the title of the class is Living Free, Embodying Healing and Creativity in the Era of Racial Justice Movements. And I can't think of anyone who I can think of in that idea of embodying healing and creativity more than you, Kia. So I really, really appreciate the time and energy and all the work that you've made over these past years.
Thank you.
And I'll also say, having been to Stanford, I kind of have been fighting back tears a little bit, having graduated from here, because I don't remember having such rich and important conversations around HIV on campus. So it means a great deal to me as somebody deeply invested in these conversations in the years since graduating, to be back on campus and to be hearing you speak in this context to such a great full house. Also to have a class of music and meditation at the beginning.
I know, that was fab.
So anyway, it feels really, really powerful to be in this space with you, with all of us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I think I'm supposed to hand the mic.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, just one more round. Thank you so much. Yeah. I just want to set the microphone for folks if they want to ask questions. Yeah. Cool. So we have a few more minutes. Is there any questions?
We're living free. Ask now. Don't wait.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for speaking. The question I had was, how do you, begin to do art? Not just a single piece of art, but just how do you start doing art? And because I feel like the process of healing and exploring and revealing through art is such an intimate one. The very first act of starting is so difficult for at least myself. And how do you begin to art?
I think how I began is I write a lot of lists. I'm like the queen of writing a list. And I try to write these 3 things, which I will encourage you to write too. What makes you happy? What makes you the most happy? What makes you angry? Like really angry? And what do you want to change? And these are things that I think about all the time. And that's kind of where my art making process kind of starts. Because I'm like, what makes me happy? What makes me really upset? And how can I change things? What are things that I can change? And from then I think of, in terms of my process, what feels the best, Am I working with my hands? Am I painting something? Am I photographing something? Am I working through, the computer? What is it that's gonna make me feel really good making whatever this is? So that's really how my process starts. And I encourage you all to make lists. Lists are really great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Tiandre. Thank you very much for coming and speaking and giving your whole truth with visual aids, LOL. But I just want to ask, as somebody who's very much interested in the space of prevention, what you feel as somebody who identifies, as a woman, the space has been like with this new conversation of prevention in HIV and AIDS, especially being in, such an urban center and being around, lots and lots of youth who are experiencing, a different context even than what you've experienced just in the advent of prevention in the first place. How has that changed things for you?
How's it changed things? That's a good idea. There's a lot of conversation around PrEP and around PEP. And, I try to engage in the conversation, but I feel like I can't fully engage in that conversation because I think about the process of somebody taking, those medications by their own will. And I think about my own thoughts about having to take those medications. And I just feel like I couldn't even comment on it. I couldn't even really say. But I would say that, for women, I think the conversation is still not enough, and especially for women and girls, there's such a component with violence that comes into play in terms of HIV. And I talked to a young girl one time through text message because I met someone who was like, oh, my niece, she's 17, she was born with HIV. She doesn't know what to do. And I text her and she was like, yeah, I'm afraid to get a tattoo. I never went on a date, all these things because there's so much fear. So really my biggest thing is conversation, is, talking and educating people. I did an AIDS assembly at the high school that I went to, and I spoke about HIV, and these 6th and 7th graders came up to me and they're like, oh my God, thank you for coming and telling us about this. We have no idea what this is. And that made me so scared because I'm like, you guys are at an age where you're probably experimenting if you're not having sex already. And if you don't know about this, and how can you, love yourself by, keeping yourself safe and protected, keeping your partner safe, and just encouraging people to be open and vulnerable enough to have conversation. Because that's really all it comes down to. If you can have an open dialogue with somebody, if you can talk to them about things that are very important, because your body is so important and your partner's body is so important. So it's all about communication. So.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. First, I want to thank you so much for blessing a space that I feel in a way that is actually healing for me, just being here. I graduated in 2013 from here, and related to that, I want to thank you, Lanan, and you, Jeff, so much. Sorry, a-lan, love you. For making this space and this ongoing course so incredibly transformative to this living here. You brought up so much in your story that is so similar to mine, and I had two questions. The first was, my father passed away when I started school here, and if it wasn't for a grief group that was on campus, one of the very rare few ones that I had to seek out very actively, I wouldn't have been able to start the processing, and allow the grieving as it happened, as it needed to happen. And related to that, I actually was able to run out of my closet because I never had to tell him. So I'm curious about your relationship to your mother in terms of queerness and being in vogue and maybe giving up or moving on from ballet as well. because I also started with classical forms and moved away from them, and I'm still working on queering my whole self and movement. So thank you.
Well, my mom used to be a dancer as well. So she loved dance and she always supported me. And I remember when I was a kid, she like sat me down. She told me everything very early on in life. I knew a lot of things way too young. But she sat me down and she said, listen, whoever it is you decide to love in your life is your choice. It doesn't matter, male or female. I just want you to know that. I must have been like 6 or something like that. So this is something that I've always taken with me, and that's something that, you know, I understand on the other side is like something that like she would be proud of, you know. My dad, on the other hand, is another situation. We're still working on him. But I think it's really great that you were able to experience, you know, a healing space for grieving. I think I did some grieving counseling as well. And I think I remember being upset because the woman who was counseling me didn't have any kind of real connection to what real grieving was about. And I had to question her a lot because she was trying to tell me a lot about things that I felt like she didn't really fully know. But I think in terms of like, you know, coming to terms with things that like sometimes you feel like you didn't get to say, is that you work on projects which make you feel like you can embody this relationship and you can embody all the things, you know, that you didn't, you know, actually physically get to say person to person because, you know, your father is still with you, you know. He's still here. He literally is running through the blood in your veins. He's in your face, you know, he's everything about you, you know. So it's about first, you know, coming to terms with yourself and loving yourself and accepting it. And then if there's something that you physically want to do to create something that might feel like a, not closure, but like something that will round off your experience, that will put, you know, an extra touch on that relationship, I would say go for it. And whatever it is, it could be anything.
Do I have one more question?
I'm sweating, y'all. It's getting hot in here.
Thank you so much. One more question.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming and speaking. It was really amazing, and your art is beautiful. But I'm particularly interested in the choice to be glamorous. So you have these scenarios that are not glamorous at all. You know, morning sickness is, I'm sure, awful, and getting your blood drawn in a dress, it seems to be like a political choice. So I guess my question is, why do you look beautiful?
Because I am beautiful. Everybody say it with me. I am beautiful. Oh my God, y'all do not believe in yourselves at all. Everybody get up, let's do the pose. Let's do the pose. Here we go. 5, 6, here we go. I am beautiful. There we go, everyone sit your asses down. Now, I use glamour because that's how I see myself. You know, if I came outside of my body, if I imagine my situation in, you know, in the way that I saw a Disney movie growing up, you know, or if I saw a fairy tale growing up, that's what I would see. So that's the way that I portray it, you know. And in doing that, you know, when I think about some of those situations, they're not as painful for me, because I think about that moment of taking myself out of my body and seeing myself as this beautiful, glamorous, Cinderella, Pocahontas type chick, you know, and just being able to accept, you know, my own beauty, you know, and glamour is something that I've always just been drawn to. You know, I used to watch a lot of Hollywood movies when I was a kid, and, you know, like I said before, I've always been interested in musical theater and costume and play, and so, you know, I think about, you know, how do I play with my pictures, you know, and how do I make things, you know, a little bit lighter, you know, even though, you know, the photos are deep, how do I make them feel like me? And I use LaBeija, who is my character. You know, we all put on these masks, right? We wear these masks in the world as how we want to be seen, as we want, how we want people to see us, but also how we see ourselves, you know? So this is how I see myself, you know? Fab, glam, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.